Welcome to the Fried Egg Golf Podcast. I'm Garrett Morrison, and today we're talking about the host of the upcoming Open Championship, Royal Troon Golf Club. You might have heard of it. We're digging into the history and architecture of Royal Troon and also discussing some of the other great courses in its area on the west coast of Scotland. To help me do all of that, I'm bringing on Sam Cooper. Sam is an associate for the architecture firm Clayton, DeVries Pont, and he has played literally every links course in Great Britain. That's not an exaggeration, just a description of his very ambitious Links from the Road tour, which he took a couple of years back and is currently writing a book series about. So in addition to discussing Royal Troon, I thought I'd also pick Sam's brain about some of the courses that he saw around Royal Troon, because he saw them all. So really fun episode ahead. And by the way, if you enjoy Sam Cooper's contribution to our podcast, then check out his podcast, Golf Badgers. That's a fun listen as well. Sam's a great guy and a really sharp architecture mind. First, though, I thought I'd talk a little bit about our sponsor, Golf Forever. Golf Forever is an at-home training system that combines great coaching and personalized follow-along video programs in the Golf Forever app with an incredibly versatile golf training tool called the Swing Trainer. This program and this tool will help you add flexibility, strength, and balance, and you'll find yourself far more able to hit the first tee ready to go. I've been using the Golf Forever app and Swing Trainer for the past few weeks now, and my strength, balance, and flexibility are noticeably better already, especially as those factors relate to the golf swing, because this is really targeted at that motion, which is a strange motion. You know, it's hard to exercise for it, and that's what Golf Forever does for you. It makes you flexible and strong in the ways that are specifically relevant to the golf swing. So, to get started with Golf Forever right now, go to golfforever.com and use the code EGG to save an extra $50 on any training system package. That's golfforever.com, code EGG, E-G-G. All right, let's get to my conversation with Sam Cooper about Royal Troon. So, Sam, you live in Liverpool, as I understand it, not far from
Hoylake,
Royal
please.
Liverpool. You live in Hoylake. Okay, I'm sorry. You live in the Liverpool area. I'm an ignorant American here. These distinctions.
Garrett, I am just winding you up. That's exactly where I live. I'm in northwest England, but I'm about a 5-minute walk, maybe a 4-minute walk to the Spike Bar at Royal Liverpool Golf Club. So yeah, I'm pretty lucky where we are.
Pretty good place to be. I assume this means that you went to the Open last year, or that you were at least around the Open. So what was that experience like?
Every day, yeah. Well, it was very different from the two other Opens that we've had in my lifetime at the club. 2014 when Rory won, and of course 2006 when Tiger won. It seems weird. I never would have believed if at the time you'd said Tiger wouldn't win another Open Championship since then, and same for Rory. Let's hope both of them are just another one so far. But yeah, we've had three pretty memorable. Well, certainly 2.5 that have been very memorable, and one that was a bit of a washout last year, which was such a shame. But they're brilliant. They consume everything. They take over the town. It's only a small Hoylake itself. It's not big. It's just this little coastal town. 25 minutes we are from Liverpool itself. But it goes from, I don't know how many of us live here, but not many. And then all of a sudden, a couple of hundred, maybe 250,000 people descend for the week of the Open. So naturally, it sort of really does take over, and it is a real buzz for the week and leading up to it as well.
I haven't thought of it this way before, but there is kind of a Royal Liverpool curse, right? Tiger wins there, Rory wins there, and we expect
never again.
Many more Opens.
Well, like you, I've not really thought about it either. But if you were to go back, we were historically, 1930, we were the last Open Championship that Bobby Jones won. Although I'd say that's for slightly different reasons. He sort of hung everything up the end of that year in that pretty impressive year that he had. But he won the Open Championship of his Grand Slam here at Hoylake in 1930. But yeah, so maybe not for all of them. But DiVincenzo, he won in 67. He didn't win again. But not like he was someone that necessarily had an enormous streak. But Peter Thompson did. He won again, I think. No, of course he did. So he won in the 50s, and Walter Hagen won in the 20s. But yeah, I guess at least, let me think about this quickly, maybe 6 or 7, maybe more, never won another Open Championship. So you can draw it reasonably, I'd say.
So look out, Brian Harman, in other words.
Yeah, that's it now. Game over. No, I'm sure if he puts anything like he did for that week last year, then he there's nothing that he couldn't win, really. But that was just... Yeah. I wonder what the likes of Lou Stagner and the guys would make of that putting performance statistically.
I mean, I assume they would think it's pretty good, but you never know. You never know. You never know what the data
Probably
boys
best
are
not to
say.
be drawn, Garrett.
In any case, changing the subject real quick, let's talk about Royal Troon. This is why I've brought you on the pod, first and foremost, to discuss the venue of the Open Championship next week, Troon. You're very familiar, as we'll discuss more in depth later, with every links course in Great Britain. But let's dig into Troon specifically. Broad strokes, not talking about any specific holes yet. What's the history of the design here? How did it evolve from its earliest form to its Open Championship form?
Well, you'll forgive me, I'm no historian really on Troon's complete evolution, but like many places, it did change a lot, and I think that is a distinction that we make in Britain. This is slightly lost on your side of the Atlantic, so it was going from 9-hole courses and then extending and expanding. But, it's back in 1878. It's quite some time ago now that, well, what's that, almost 150 years in just a few years' time. So it's old, it's old, not necessarily old in absolute Scottish terms. But yeah, no, it is. And I think it was probably safe to say it was shaped by its early professionals, the sort of the Willie Fernies, the guys who, when golf really was growing in that late part of the 20th century, it was the 19th century, forgive me. It was those Scottish professionals who really then went around, built new courses in the area. I think Willie Fernie, was he the Open Championship in 1882 maybe? But he was, for many, all of the courses that sort of exist in that Ayrshire region going down to Dumfries and Galloway as you get close to the border in southwest Scotland, there were so many that he would have had a hand in laying out or popularising or playing matches, opening matches when the course, drum up that popularity. Because golf was later to southwest Scotland than it certainly was to the east coast of Scotland. But of course, Prestwick next door to Troon was probably an intrinsic part of its sort of early days and its history. But really, in our modern era, it is Troon that is well known for the Open Championship and not Prestwick next door.
Right. This evolution that you spoke to earlier from 9 holes or sometimes like 6 or 7 holes or 11 holes to 18 holes is one of the most interesting general stories in early golf, the way that 18 holes eventually became standardized. And Royal Troon is sort of an example of that.
You should do a podcast, absolutely, on how many holes should, this is maybe getting slightly off topic, but how many holes should a golf course be? But, if you think that or forgive me, I think maybe Prestwick had the first 23 Open whatever. No, of course it wasn't that at all. But I think they did have 23 before Troon had its first. Mm-hmm. But if you were to think how many they had when the Open Rota then sort of grew at all, by the time Musselburgh joined, by the time that the old course joined, you had 3 courses between 12-hole Prestwick, between 9-hole Musselburgh and 18-hole St Andrews, as it ultimately became, that just, they picked a number, well, what's a common multiple, 36 holes, and, it's either 3 12s, 4 9s, or 2 18s, and really, to think that virtually every golf course in the world then becomes 18 holes, when the first Open Rota, if you can call it that, was 3 courses with 3 different numbers, is just worlds away from where it came from.
If anybody out there is interested in looking into this history, Peter Lewis, that's the name. Peter Lewis, the historian, wrote a great book called Why Are There 18 Holes? And essentially his thesis is that St Andrews' influence was such that every other course eventually adapted to the St Andrews model. But there are some nuances in that history and some little sort of roads not taken that could potentially have been taken that are very interesting to think about now, because we could be facing a very different golf landscape if 12 had become the standard number of holes for a golf
Absolutely.
course.
And the great, St Andrews historian Roger McStravick would say, well, if that explosion in popularity had coincided with the point in time when St Andrews was 22 holes rather than 18, then maybe it's a different number again that actually prevails as the sort of as the norm. So there are so many, as you say, little quirks and nuances and points in time. And I think if we were to think of golf, this is just my little philosophy, especially having grown up at Hoylake and thinking a lot about one little point in time where Royal Liverpool was a point that sort of pushed the game of golf forward. It's easy to think that golf moves forward uniformly and sort of constantly, and it's just not the case at all. There are just certain points and junctures where things really, really explode and change, move forward, and then perhaps they're followed by a lot less, or maybe even a bit of regression. So it's just timing, all of these things.
Let's get back to Royal Troon. The 8th hole, the famous postage stamp. How much do you know about how this hole came about?
Well, it's as good a place to start as any, isn't it? It's probably the most famous, certainly the most famous par 3 on the Open Rota. But again, that is, I think Troon would be well characterized as generally a bit like Hoylake, sort of a flatter course that goes out, and certainly the first half a dozen holes and the last sort of, let's think about it, maybe the last 5 holes run parallel to one another. But it's that section from the 7th when you cut inland round to the sort of 12, 13, where for me, that is the most memorable and interesting part of a golf course. It is a lot more memorable and interesting than perhaps some give it credit for, but no more so than that postage stamp. And yeah, I think different stories. You get so many conflicting things, whether it was Braid who had a hand, whether it was Willie Fernie who had a hand. You've got these beautiful illustrations that we all associate with Bernard Darwin's Golf Course of Great Britain and Ireland book. Those beautiful illustrations, sort of, I think for Troon, it shows. Oh, there you go. Right there. Does it show the...
For people who are listening to this audio only, I've interrupted Sam by holding up my copy of The Golf Courses of the British Isles by Bernard Darwin. And on the cover, there's this wonderful illustration by Harry Roundtree, or painting, of the postage stamp, which really puts an emphasis on the dune that the green is cut into. But this illustration dates back to, I would assume, at least 1910, though I'm not sure that the hole really had taken the form that it has now at that point. At least the green site was there.
Yeah, and changed, and the famous coffin bunker, I think, certainly added afterwards. But it was, well, so the story goes. I know there are many different retellings of it, but it was Willie Park who described it as being skimmed down to the size of a postage stamp, wasn't it? And it's God, has there ever been a better description of a golf hole, that becomes eponymous? It's perfect, because that green is miniature. But despite being tiny, I think that it's a hole that has a lot more subtlety than perhaps first appears, and perhaps that's what makes it such an enduringly interesting hole that we will always talk about when the Open goes back to Troon.
What are some of its subtleties? Like, what's the secret sauce of this hole, aside from the fact that it's a very small green, a penal green, a short hole? What's the secret sauce here?
Well, I think it's so interesting that you've just said, it's short and it's penal. And of course you're right. I think I wanted to sort of make sure I wasn't imagining this, but the green is so small. It's only 200 and something square feet, 270. I think they've
expanded it slightly for this year, but like at the front. But yeah, not 270
square meters, I should say, rather. That's the Atlantic between us that gets that imperial and metric. But the green itself it's deep. It's almost 100 feet front to back. And I always make this point because people just think, oh, it's tiny green. And of course it is. But I think for me, the best par three is on the open rota. I'm thinking of the 11th at St Andrews being absolutely the embodiment of this. They are greens where, as the pin moves around on day to day in the Open Championship, as the wind changes direction and strength, as whether you are attacking or whether you are defending, whether the ground has gotten particularly firm or whether it's a little softer, all of those characteristics kind of combine to maybe slightly change how you might play the hole. And I think if you just think of a typical penal hole, that's probably not really going to be the case. You might end up playing it the same way, irrespective of those conditions. And I do think that the Postage Stamp is that slight anomaly, because with such a deep green, it's sort of broader, which isn't to say wide, because it's not wide at any point, but it is certainly wider at the front of the green. I think I measured it almost 50 feet at the front and certainly under 30 feet at the back. So it gets narrower. So you have this point, you stand on the tee, and if that pin is right at the very back of the green, you might say, well, you know what, I'm going to take a club less, which you can do over 100 feet of green, and play to the front of the green. I've got less club, so I'm probably going to be slightly more accurate, and I've got twice the width to actually aim for, because I know that I can two-putt, and that's all I need to do. I just need to avoid the blow up, the disaster that might come if you try and be too greedy, too aggressive, and don't quite execute. So, it is that battle between the golfer's ambition and the pride coming before the fall. So it's probably a little more strategic, really, for a hole that people wouldn't necessarily ever think that hole has any strategy that comes into the mind.
I love that description because it gets at what most great short par threes have in common, and that's the mental battle on the tee. Yes. This is what's so fascinating about the 12th hole at Augusta National. Obviously, a bit of a longer hole, but still, especially for the pros these days, a short par three. But what you go through in your mind when you're standing on that tee and trying to figure out where to play your ball, and then standing up to the ball and trying to execute a shot that is just really uncomfortable. I think there's a lot of commonality between that tension and what you get on the 8th tee at Royal Troon.
I wonder, Garrett, how many players have in their mind before they play any shot of a championship. They go and they play their practice rounds. They have their strategies in place, and they say, right, this is what I'm going to do. And how many of them actually change it because they get tempted into something? When that pin, because it's 123 yards, that hole, it's not long. And they can play it forward as well. I think it can be sub 100 yards, 99 yards if they push the tee forward. So, there's got to be players who maybe started the week thinking, no, I'm going to play short of the pin if it's there, or really try and be disciplined and realistically never going to have a very long putt, because it does have a slight false front. So as long as you're on the green, and again, what's the maximum putt you might have? 40 something feet. So you're never going to walk off if you've hit that green really worrying too much about three putting it. But they might just get tempted into taking something, biting off more than they can chew, and then coming to regret it. And that's the sort of real commonality, I guess, between there and Augusta.
If you had to rank the 5 bunkers on the postage stamp according to how little you would want to be in them, what would your ranking be? And just to clarify, you've got the coffin bunker, green side left, right? Correct me if I'm getting any of these wrong. Deep bunker, green side right.
Yeah.
And then pot bunkers, short left, short right, and then one long right. So there are 5 bunkers. Not all of them are hard against the green or anything. So what's, where do you really not want to be, and where is it kind of maybe okay to be? Obviously dependent on pin position.
I never really thought of that, but it's such an interesting question, and I guess comes again back to that point of what's the wind doing, where's the pin, and how firm is the green. But one of the things I particularly love about it, I seem to remember, you'll remember this better than me, I'm not very good on championship golf, but was it Tony Finau who almost holed it last time and then it spun off into the bunker short?
That's a good question. I should remember that, but I don't. That sounds right. That sounds like something that would happen to Tony Finau in a major championship.
It's certainly something that can happen. And again, I think it's a good illustration, that bunker, the interaction between, a really, really short, that's, pinish front and tee is forward, and you have got sub 100 yards. Well, it becomes then a challenge not of can you carry the ball 99 yards? Yeah, of course these guys can. They can tell you to half a yard where it's going to pitch, probably. The question, and it's probably the thing I love most about watching the Open Championship, especially when the wind is blowing, which unfortunately it hasn't for this a while, but can you manage your spin? Can you control the spin? It's something that we, being golfers of, a million miles off their caliber, but it's something that you just have absolutely ground into you from being a little kid playing golf. If you play golf in the wind, can you sort of dead arm your pitch into the wind, take the spin off? Can you, get a bit more spin when it's downwind, get it higher, get it landing a bit softer? As I'd say, my standard of golf and theirs is just the distance between the two is absolutely astronomical. But it's a skill that you kind of need in Britain that you don't necessarily have in other parts of the world. So, to come back to your question, spinning it off the false front and into that bunker that's short of the green, well, then you're going to invariably be left with, the kind of bunker shot. Who was it? It's Royal St George's when he on the 16th, and he left it coming back down into the bunker 3 or 4 times. Was it Thomas LeVay? You end up with that really...
my memory is going. I'm getting old soon. No, but again, I know what you're talking about.
But everyone will be able to remember.
You're talking about a long bunker shot up a false front.
Longer than you'd want. Not Bryson at Pinehurst long, but longer than you'd want. And you've got to get it...
Especially on a 100-yard hole. You're absolutely, like, why? What am I doing here? Given that I just hit a half wedge into the screen.
That's if you find yourself there, you want the do-over. That's the one that you want to take again. So that would be one that, depending on how you sit in that bunker, it's easily recoverable, but it's also easy to compound your mistake, especially if the reason you've ended there is because the hole is into the wind, as it can be. Prevailing wind would be sort of into off the right. So it's entirely possible that you've spun the ball back there, and then you think, oh, I've now got to actually make sure that the last thing you want to do is then compound your initial mistake, and it's so easily done. So I'd say that's disastrous. I seem to think that coffin bunker was actually dug to stop people playing into the bank, the hill that you referred to, the dune that the hole is cut into, and then sort of letting it bounce
taking
down
away
onto
the backboard.
Green. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure, I don't know where I read it, so again, historians will be screaming at their podcast provider.
Look, I like the story, so let's stick with it.
It's a great story, isn't it? But it's true, you could absolutely imagine with that high left back point, and if we were, say that the wind is into and off the right-hand side, and most people are right-handed, and again, there's the beauty of that hole at Augusta. If you've got short right, long left, missed pattern, then that coffin bunker is not only in play, but to be plugged under the back lip of that coffin bunker is entirely possible. Because if you've just come and you've put another 2 yards of carry on, all of a sudden with such fine margins, you can be absolutely up against it, quite literally. So you never really want to be in there. So I would say the one that I'd most like to be in is probably that back right one, because if you're going to end up back right, then realistically you don't miss long right, do you? Something's gone wrong. So if anything, it's probably helping you out a little bit. But there are no real good options for missing it, and that's why I think so many of them would just play it a little safer, take the medicine, and try and walk off with 4 threes.
Listen, I can imagine a number of types of swings that I could put on the ball that would put me in that back right bunker, namely the kind of heely, bladed wedge. But obviously block. It's not quite as in play.
That just cuts through the wind.
Yeah, exactly right. The wind cheater into the back right bunker. All right. Well, Sam, I didn't intend to actually do a deep dive into the postage stamp hole. I was more thinking like, let's swerve away from the postage stamp and talk about kind of the hip, cool, hidden holes at Royal Troon. But it's just so interesting to talk about number 8, and I'm glad we did that. But stepping back and looking at the course more generally, let's go back to the routing. You mentioned this earlier. There are these 2 really clear phases, or 3 really phases of Royal Troon's routing. 2 kind of separate pieces of land. One is the flatter stretch of land that goes out to the dunes. Then you have the dunes holes, and the routing there starts to get a little bit more varied, right? The holes are kind of wrapping around each other and doubling back. Whereas when you're on the flatter land, you're just going out and back, because the whole point of the course, the whole point of the routing is to get out to those dunes where the 7th through the 12th holes sit. And they're wonderful dunes, wonderful golf holes. But if you were to make an argument for the first 6 holes on the course and the last 6 holes on the course, the holes that more or less run out and back and sit on the kind of subtler seaside land, what argument would you make for those holes? What should people look for? Why might they be considered interesting?
Bunkers. In a word, bunkers. I think they've got maybe about 100, just under 100 bunkers at Troon, but most of them, and I really do mean most of them, are on that flatter section there. I think it's something like 2/3 of all of the bunkers are on the last, the first 6 or 7 and the last 4. So, I know that sounds like most of the holes, but effectively you go from, let's say 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So that kind of section there, I think they've got fewer than 2 bunkers a hole on average. And that's with 5 of them on the postage stamp. But, you've got fewer than 2 bunkers a hole. Whereas I think I saw on the opening and the closing holes, you got an average of nearly 8 bunkers a hole. And for me, the first time I stood on that first tee, and it's a beautiful spot. You've got the sea immediately to the right. You don't really sit on the water like you might do down the road at Turnberry, at Troon, but it's always there, and it's a beautiful backdrop, sort of playing away from the town of Troon itself. But my enduring memory is always of avoiding the bunkers. And, again, I think most recreational golfers, most of us amateurs, really think of the challenge that wind provides being when you play into the wind. And yeah, that's definitely the case for, when your biggest concern is, am I square as impact? But when you are slightly above that in terms of you're plotting your way around a golf course, when the pros are there, especially if it's firm, and I think we've had one of the wettest periods that I've ever lived through. So it's very unlikely that Troon will be as firm as it could be. But, if it does firm up enough to really let them worry about it, then I'd always argue that great holes are actually harder for the best players when they're played downwind rather than into the wind. You think into the wind, you think of that 2-iron that Rory McIlroy hit at the Scottish Open last year at Renaissance, and it was, massively, massively into the wind, and all the story was, well, he normally hits his 2-iron, I don't know, stock 280 or whatever, and he hit it 200 yards, but the point is it landed and it near enough stopped. Well, that's the benefits of playing into the wind. If you are driving into a sea of bunkers in front of you, and it is down the prevailing wind, and it is firm, the challenge isn't, can I reach X, Y, or Z? The challenge is, how do I stop my ball running that bit further, losing all control, and all of a sudden you could have played the first 6 holes at Troon. You could have been in a bunker on every single one of them.
Yeah, distance control becomes chaotic when it's downwind and when you have a firm surface, especially. But downwind, that exact distance control kind of slips away from you a little bit. Whereas if you're going into the wind and you're a good player who can control trajectory and spin to an extent, then you can kind of rely on it a bit more, even if your ball is not going as far as you're used to.
Absolutely. And because it's not then the absolute distance that matters. That's when a bit of the artistry does come back. You think 2018 at Carnoustie, and it was so firm, it was as baked out as you could possibly get. Well, who starts the back nine leading? Well, Tiger Woods. And I think 2006, I think back to the Open that we had at Hoylake, where he famously hit one driver for the 4 days, and he hit his 2-iron near enough everywhere. And, it is the difference between the real artist, the guy who has complete mastery over not just the distance this his ball flies through the air, but can control the spin, can control the trajectory. Because, if you were to say, oh, I've got 147 into this, what do I hit? Well, as soon as you get in funky conditions, there is no right answer to that question anymore. So I think that let's hope there is a bit of wind, or at least as far as I'm concerned, let's hope there's a little wind and it can get as firm as it possibly can. Because I think that the player who can control not just their carry, not just their accuracy, but their trajectory, the shot shapes, and really think about it a little more, and can also be tolerant of, a dodgy bounce into a bunker and not let it faze them. Their skills that are rarely tested, and certainly the opening run of holes at Troon gives that opportunity to really test a different type of skill set. This is often required.
Let's talk about one Dunes hole. I'll let you choose either 10 or 11. Both of these holes
it's gotta be.
are pretty wonderful and really fun to watch and impressive to look at in a way that some of the holes at Royal Troon are not immediately impressive to look at. So which one of those holes is the one that you think about the most? And what do you think about when you think about it?
Well, when we were talking about the postage stamp, you said we should avoid the obvious pitfalls of talking about the most obvious holes. And with eyes wide open,
I've gone to the other two most obvious holes. Yeah,
I'm going to go right into the exact same mistake and talk about the 11th, because it really is. The 11th is called Railway, and it doesn't take a genius to see why. It is really the kind of hole that so many golf courses in this part of the world, but many others, how many boundary holes can you think of, Garrett, on the open rotor even that have a hard boundary that came from a railway track? And it's a big part of the reason these golf courses were built in the first place, where they were and how they were accessed, and it is a key part of it. So Troon's 11th is probably one of the most famous versions of it. Now, it used to be a par 5. I think it's now 498, and it's of course derisory 498 yards. Well, that's got to be a par 4, surely. But it's a hole that's straight into the teeth of the wind, and it's a great hole in that it will undoubtedly rattle the players. They've got to navigate it. They've got to survive it. But it's perhaps slightly less of the classic boundary hole that we might read about in our nice little books on course architecture and all the rest of it. But it's not, because there's now so much gorse down the left, which never used to be there. It always was a question of how far left you bail out, because you don't want to be on the railway track and bunkered sort of short left of the green accordingly. But now it's going to be, as it has been in the last few Open Championships, sort of pretty narrow into the wind. You've turned back against the prevailing wind on the 10th tee, so you really, really are digging deep, just trying to hit to something that will find the fairway, something that will find the green. But it is undoubtedly going to have a role to play, as it has in many of the previous Opens. But the 10th hole is probably what most people really think of when they think of links golf, and blind tee shots and fairway giving way to sort of rough ground in the middle, and no bunkers, I think, on that hole. But it is, it's a beautiful, beautiful setting, just slightly away from at the far point of the course. You're only a couple of 100 yards from being on Prestwick. But it's a beautiful place, and it's a beautiful part of the course. And it is, I think, one of the great strengths of Troon, that you have such different challenges and different types of golf all blended together in one golf course.
I think you've put your finger right there on what does make Royal Troon distinctive and memorable in the open rota, because I think in general Royal Troon is maybe one of the less loved open rota venues, especially now that it doesn't seem like the Open's going back to Lytham anytime soon. I'm not sure. I love watching that course, but I think it's similar to Royal Troon in the sense that it doesn't stand out for people like the old course does, or like St. George's does with its incredible dunescape, or like Carnoustie with those amazing, very difficult holes at the end with the burn. Royal Troon maybe has a little bit of trouble standing out in the open rota. But I think one thing that it does have going for it is this variety of landscapes, of types of holes. It has two different kinds of routing principles within one course. It has the out and back, but it also has the Muirfield circular swirling routing in the dunes. And so it really does combine a number of different attributes that you look for in links golf.
Yeah, it always reminds me a little of Panmure. I don't know if you've ever, next door to Carnoustie, the course where Ben Hogan famously practiced before his 53 Open Championship win there, and perhaps one of the best holes in Scotland, their 6th hole. But it's a hole that is, it's a course that this is similar in that you have the clubhouse, you have a corridor really of holes that take you from the clubhouse in straight linear fashion to then a much broader site with grander, more, dare I say, interesting lands that you then meander and navigate round, and then you sort of get to the end of that broader part of the course and come back to the clubhouse. So, it's not unique in that sense, but it is certainly on the open rotor. Yeah, to have a bit of both probably is, because Royal St George's, Hoylake, Birkdale, Lytham, they are all sorts of broad rectangular-ish, massive generalization, but broad sites. So to have this kind of, almost like a letter P shape with the narrow section and then broadening out is a little different. But really, I think the way that you've just put your finger on that really important issue is, for me, almost more representative of the problem with golf in general. The fact that, how often will we say of our own courses that we get to play on, every day, every week, every month, whatever it might be. The mark of a great golf course, I don't think many people would disagree, is one that gets better every single time you play it. And just as I think most people would probably accept that, I think so often the exact reverse is also true. There are courses that just blow you away the first time you play it because they're so grand, so dramatic. But, by the time you've played them 2, 3, half a dozen, 10 times, you go, oh, you know what? It's still beautiful and the views are still amazing. But actually, on reflection, I'd rather play at, for example, the Old Course, or Carnoustie, or Muirfield, or Rye. These courses that every single time you play them, they get better and better. And I do think that is a slight affliction on the game in general. If you go and play somewhere once, and then you move on to the next one, we're victims of our success that we have so many wonderful golf courses to go and play. So why would anyone logically go and play Troon 4 times when they could also go and play Western Gales and Prestwick and Turnberry and Glasgow Gales, all these places as are nearby? You probably wouldn't. But because of that, I do think that you lose a bit of the nuance, and perhaps, in our line of work, in the architecture business, you almost can get tripped up by trying to stand out on play number 1 rather than just really concern yourself with a hole that gets better and better every single time you play it.
Hey, I just wanted to poke my head in here real quick to talk about a product that the USGA green section is offering. The GS3 ball is the smartest ball in golf. This is not a golf ball, but instead a groundbreaking tool that delivers never before seen insights into playing surface performance. Combined with the Deacon management portal, this sensor ball collects over 15,000 data points, instantly measuring a green's firmness, speed, smoothness, and trueness. The GS3 ball was originally conceived by USGA agronomists for the US Open and other USGA events. It's engineered to provide superintendents with actionable data so you can begin making informed decisions on maintenance practices and how those practices impact your surface performance. So this is a must-have tool for every golf course maintenance operation. To learn more about the GS3, visit the USGA Green Section's website at gshop.usga.org. All right, let's get back to my interview. So Sam, I want to talk about all of the golf around Royal Troon, and there is a lot. But first, I think people should know how you became familiar with these courses. Tell me about your Links from the Road project.
Yeah, I don't know what stage of life crisis you'd call it. Maybe slightly before
quarter life
crisis, but a bit beyond quarter. I think I've done too much.
Let's be optimistic.
Too much damage as a golfer. Let's be optimistic. But certainly, I don't think anyone would disagree with the latter half of the term. But when COVID sort of came, and everywhere had a slightly different approach to how they managed that extraordinarily weird parcel of time. But where we were in England, we were locked down. And Harriet, my long-suffering wife, she and I were sat at home, and we worked for ourselves, so we weren't able to furlough or anything, but we were coming up between projects, and the world was just so strange. We just said, look, why don't we, probably never going to have an opportunity like this again, to almost take a bit of a sabbatical, bit of time out, bit of time away from everything that we'd just fallen into the groove of doing. And, the juxtaposition between being locked down in our home, our summer holiday that we'd had in 2019 was actually a driving holiday. So we drove with our two dogs around route called the North Coast 500. And I'd encourage anyone to actually just Google those words, North Coast 500, and you'll see one of the best driving holidays, vacations that you could ever take. And it effectively goes all through the Scottish Highlands and all the way around. And we spent a couple of weeks doing that. And I'd played, like many people, it wasn't meant to be a golfing holiday, but the clubs found their way into the car, and I managed to play at Dornoch, and I managed to play at Brora. And I played this amazing 9-hole course called Durness. And that was it. That was the extent of it. But all through the lockdown, a few months later, we were sort of just thinking back to that freedom and our lack thereof during the COVID period, and thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to go exploring again? So we sort of got into this van life stuff, and you see it on YouTube, and that's probably when we ran out of things on Netflix to watch. That's what we started watching instead.
I have seen this. This is like a whole culture. There's
it's a world of its own.
Yeah.
And I'd never been camping. I'm incredibly lazy and all the rest of it. I'd never been camping, but we were sort of driven to strange things, and we thought, oh, maybe this is a good idea. So when we were allowed to go back into the real world again, we managed to find a van that someone had converted into a pretty nice camper van, and we sort of tweaked it, changed it, finished it off. And the idea was we'd go and spend what remains of the summer in 2020 and the autumn, as long as the good weather would hold, driving around and having a bit of an adventure. And that's what we did. And of course, then I thought, well, look, if I'm going to do this, I may as well indulge my passion for links golf. So that's exactly what it turned out to be. So I thought, well, maybe over the course of my lifetime, it would be nice to play links golf courses. That's my real passion. That's what I love. So I started pulling together a list, and, there are books and there are lists of things generally that you'll find, and they're all slightly different. And I had a few that I thought had been missed off some of the general wisdom things. So I thought, well, I'm going to pull my own list together, and I'm going to go and see them. And before you know it, it had turned into a bit of it had grown arms and legs. So from September through till Christmas time, 2020, I played 75 different courses, probably 100 and something rounds over them, because we had a few that I kept going back to. But then 21, I played another 100, and then 2022, I sort of finished off the last 50, which sort of comprised the 225 that I'd ended up with on my list. So that was really the sort of, whatever it was, third of a life crisis to go and ended up playing all of the links and coastal courses, really, of England, Scotland, and Wales, Great Britain.
Well, first of all, that sounds amazing. I think a lot of us have had, fantasies about doing something exactly like that. So it's pretty cool that you got to do it. Zeroing in on the region of Royal Troon, though, this is South Ayrshire, right? This is the region where you find Royal Troon and all these other wonderful golf courses on the west coast of Scotland.
That's right.
Just give me a sense for why this is such a great area for golf.
Well, like many things, luck, really, I suppose. You can go all the way around the British coastline, and there will be pockets of great golf. Then there will also be hundreds of miles where there's very, very little or nothing. And, you've got to have a bunch of different factors that's all combined at the right moment in time to actually end up with an area that is like Ayrshire. And, what have you got to have? You've got to have generally sand. You want real sandy, undulating ground that might have population near enough to warrant building a golf course, and the right people to have been there at the right time. And, nowadays, you'd say most of those parts of the country that have amazing dune land, but don't have golf courses already built there, well, they never ever will, because it will be protected, and all the rest of it's from an environmental perspective. So Troon and the Ayrshire region just fortunately had most of those things combining at the right point in time, really. And yeah, there are now, I suppose we best think of a few of them, but there are probably more links courses of a quality in that little stretch, almost running as one contiguous course, really, one immediately after the other. And there are probably more there than anywhere else in terms of links golf, the world, because there are more than anywhere else in Scotland. So that is to say the world.
You've pointed this out to me in our previous conversations, but there is like this kind of unbroken stretch of golf that you can play basically starting at Prestwick or maybe even farther south than that. But Prestwick being the founding course of the region, sort of. Old Tom moved over from St. Andrews to start up Prestwick, and it was his baby, and it was the original Open Championship venue and all of that. So an enormously important course and location in golf, and a lot of this region kind of grew up around that it turned this
Absolutely.
place into a golf place. But if you look at it now, just on Google Earth, there's this great little green pathway that goes through this whole area. So tell me about that. Like, take me through what, if you were allowed to do this, you could play all of them, right?
Well, you're right. It's only reasonable to start at Prestwick, seeing as most of the golf in this part of the world did start at Prestwick. And yeah, it's these little tales, how true they are, of old Tom Morris being on the old course and playing a gutty percher golf ball and falling out with Alan Robertson.
Right, Alan Robertson being in the feathery business. He was like, "Don't you dare play the gutty," but there's no real historical.
They're just nice of the popular tales, aren't they? Yeah. There's no one I don't think who overheard that conversation still yeah. living. So we'll have to take it with maybe a grain of salt. But that's the story. And then over he went and took his young family over to Prestwick, and they had this magnificent piece of land to build golf on. And I would say the piece of land where especially the old holes are at Prestwick is just as good a piece of land as you'll find for golf absolutely anywhere. And so if you were to tee off on that first hole there, I'm pretty sure the members of Troon and Prestwick do this to this day, and they have this sort of cross-country match, a bit like the Hagen Hoof that they have down in Kent, where they basically play Deal, Royal Cinque Ports, Royal St George's, and Prince's.
Yeah, that's a good one
day,
too.
and they play there and back.
That sounds fun.
Absolutely. But they do the same thing there, and they'll play from the first tee. They'll play up to the boundary, play the holes to the boundary between Troon, and then you sort of walk across and then play the back nine of Troon from the 10th tee going into the clubhouse. Then probably have lunch there, and then do the exact reverse. And 36 holes later, you sort of stumble out of the clubhouse at the back where you started, having played entirely across country. But as we say, you could keep going. If you'd made it then to the 18th at Troon, then they've got the Portland course next door. Course that most people say Alistair McKenzie did a bit of work on. But the Portland course is adjacent, just over the road, so you could probably hit an iron over there. And then that sort of abuts one of the great provisions of municipal golf in the UK. In Troon, South Ayrshire Council, they have a brilliant array of municipal golf courses. And there are 3 in that particular part. There's the Fullerton course, the Lock Green course, and the Darley course. And they're not all necessarily 100% links courses, but they have more links holes than you'd ever really expect to find for I don't know what the green fee is, maybe £20, not negligible in the grand scheme of golf nowadays. So you can sort of play across those 3. So we've now played 6 courses. And then I guess from there you could probably find your way over the road onto Kilmarnock Barassi, which has got it used to be a sort of quite compact 18-hole course, and they expanded it, so now they've ended up with 27 holes. So they've got the Little Hill House 9-hole course there, so you can play those 2. You have to keep count for me, Garrett, because then you can sort of pop over the fence at the far side. Maybe you'd go on to, let me think about this, maybe you'd go then on to Dundonald, a new course for the area, but it's immediately abuts Barassi, and then you'd hop over the railway, assuming you can avoid the 836 going through to Prestwick, and you'd be on Western Gales, which is absolutely one of my favourite courses in that part of the world. And then maybe the final one, maybe you'd need a 3-wood from the corner of Western Gales onto Glasgow Gales, but I'm sure you could do it with the right wind. And then what's that? That's thick end of 10 golf courses that you can play from one to the next, legitimately. Well, not legitimately in a I would encourage anyone to do that, but at least it sort of demonstrates and shows just how rich it is as a region for great golf, because it is extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about a place that you can go and just stay in one town or one area and play a trip's worth of golf, this would have to be one of the best places to do that, right up there with East Lothian and Edinburgh, right? Categorically. And, East Lothian is unbelievable. Of course it is. And, between the Muirfields and North Berwick's and Gullen and you go down the coast of Dunbar, it's got brilliant golf. But so too does Ayrshire. And I would say that, I don't know what the ratio is between people going to East Lothian and not to Ayrshire. It's not close.
It's got to outright. No. And it absolutely should be, because it's not just those. You've got you've got Irvine Bogside, which is, I only didn't include it because you can't hit. I don't even think even Bryson could get from Glasgow Gales to
he's working
to
Bogside. On it. He's working on it. He's in the lab. He's in the weight room. He's working on it.
There's no limit to science. I'm sure someone said that before. But it's a brilliant. It doesn't sound very linksy, but it's a beautiful. It's got some of the quirkiest, brilliant holes that you'll find in the area. Up the coast, you've got West Kilbride, which is entirely worth playing, and then in the other direction, south of Prestwick, the old course at Prestwick, you've got Prestwick St Nicholas, which was sort of founded out of the Mechanics Club that old Tom Morris sort of founded as the Artisans Club at sort of Prestwick originally. But that's a brilliant, quirky, gorgeous little golf course. And that's before you get even to the big names further down the coast of Turnberry. So all of that, it's probably one of the richest, and it's also, yes, you've got the expensive big hitters, well-known courses, but then I'd say some of those courses I've just rattled off there, the Glasgow Gales, West Kilbride, Irvine Bogside, Prestwick St Nicholas, anyone would go there, and I would guarantee that you'd go there expecting to love Troon and Turnberry. And you know what? You will. You absolutely will. But you'll also talk about the Prestwick St Nicholas and, have you heard of Glasgow Gales? Do you know that that's part of the 6th oldest golf club in the world? Do you know all? And you'll find all
Western.
Of these
you mentioned
little
Western Gales, right? And that everybody I know who has played that course has said, amazing.
Yeah, and it is, and it's right on the water. It's it's out and back, but the clubhouse is in the middle, so you sort of return to it after 9. But it is probably that's going to be up there with Royal Cinque Ports, with the old course for having some of the most undulating, rippling links, true links ground that you'll find anywhere. And all of this coastline here is under the sort of the watchful eye across the water of even more amazing golf, because you can take a little ferry, which is probably another reason that there was so much golf there, because it was the sort of the ferry route between England and Glasgow for a long point. If you used to take the train from England from London, if you went from London to Glasgow before they connected the Lake District bit in the middle, then you'd go up to Fleetwood and then you get a ferry sort of around, and you get the ferry to this Ayrshire coast, and then you get the railway fee, pick up the railway for your last journey into Glasgow. So, maybe that has had a part to play as well. But, just further out on the islands you see there, you've got the Isle of Arran, beautiful, famous Isle of Arran, where one of my favourite courses happens to have 12 holes. Shiskeen's over there, and then you keep going, and then you get to the famous Kintyre, famous Mulla Kintyre, made not famous solely by Paul McCartney going and living and singing about it, but far more significantly for golfers, Jim Hartzell writing about Dunavity and Machrihanish and all of those extraordinary courses. So, look west is a bit of advice that I really would give, because there's 3 weeks worth of golf over there, and it's beautiful.
And you could keep going too. That's the thing about this area. You could keep going out into the islands and find more kind of out of the way places. Machrihanish, which you mentioned, was sort of the traditional farthest reach of a links golf journey. And this course has been written about going way, way back. This is not a late 20th century discovery. You see very early writings about this kind of mystical course way out on the west coast of Scotland that just, blew people's minds. But you can go there now, and it's fairly well known now, and there are more courses out there now. And then just keep going if you want to. You could just kind of get lost out there amid the, just these very remote places with some golf courses.
Beautiful places, for my money, in the world. Those Western Isles going up the Highlands of Scotland, you've got to accept a change of culture in golf. But for me, that's entirely part of the charm, part of the beauty. The fact that you then get to these honesty box courses where, maybe it's the sheep who have most recently cut the grass rather than the latest Toro hand mower. But, it is a different version of the game. But for many, many people, I think anyone I know who's been over there, no one goes away and says, "Oh, I was really disappointed with the speed of the greens at Askanish or Isle of Harris."
They go on Golf Pass and leave a review.
It's
greens are unacceptable.
If you just want to play quick greens and boring architecture, there's thousands of places. But if you want to go and play something that you'll remember for the rest of your life and have had an extraordinary sort of beautiful, memorable journey to actually get there, then fill your boots, because there are dozens of places.
All right, Sam, let's close with what you're working on right now. What are your plans for the Links from the Road project? You're writing a book, right? Am I allowed to say that at this point?
No, very, very much so.
Okay.
So sort of half my time is I say day job. It's not really much of a job, is it? Sort of designing, working on golf courses, but that is probably consumes a lot of my time. But I had all of these photographs, the video, the sort of the notes, the memories, and one of the things I really wanted to do, having visited so many beautiful places, is that I can write something about Lytham or about Troon or Turnberry and tell people realistically maybe a little bit more of what they already knew. And it's not going to make one jot of difference, really. If you haven't heard of Turnberry, then you're probably not picking up my book. If you want to know more about it, then that's great, but it probably won't change your opinion on whether you should play it or not. But just like we've talked about here, there are so many places that maybe they don't have 18 pure amazing links holes, but I'd actually make a case that very, very few, like places you could count on your finger and toes actually fill that criteria. So even the very, very best world-renowned links courses are not 100% links holes. And therefore, there are probably 150 places that you should go out of your way to play. And you don't have to spend 400 and something pounds on a green fee. You can spend £40 on a green fee. And like we were saying there, it's something you can talk about for a long time. So actually, putting the, not the underdogs, but sort of shining a light on places that I really would love more people to go and see was the motivation for this. So we've done this as a book series because otherwise, 225 courses, a few photographs and a bit of writing about all of them, it'll end up being 1,000 pages if you're not careful. And then definitely no one's going to read it or buy it then. So we're splitting it into volumes and doing it as a quarterly thing. So it's almost there. It's volume 1's almost out. linksfromtheroad.com, we're selling them on there. So if they're not available just yet, they will be not long afterwards, and hopefully people will find some places in each volume that they know about already, and a lot more in each one that they'll have never heard of that they might actually just go and visit one day.
All right, I'm looking forward to that. And finally, as you alluded to earlier, you work for Clayton, DeVries Pont. It's a great architecture firm that works all over the world, and the principals of the firm are Mike Clayton, Mike DeVries, and Frank Pont, and they each have kind of their domains of golf architecture. Mike DeVries has worked a lot in the United States, mostly in Michigan. Mike Clayton, a famous Australian golfer and architect, a great golf mind who has been on the podcast a number of times. And Frank Pont has worked in the UK and Europe quite a bit. So this is one of those super group firms. You are working in their Great Britain office. What are some projects that you can tell me about that you've been occupied with recently?
Well, I guess, as you allude to there, we all sort of have our own little passions within it. I think that a mistake maybe on our side of the pond and across Europe that you might fall into is being too much of a generalist. And I think you've probably seen I've got a reasonable passion for links golf and strategic golf, and that's really sort of what I end up getting most involved with then. For Frank, there's not many people I've come across who know more about the golf courses of Harry Colt or Tom Simpson.
Heathland Golf, he's the authority on Heathland Golf.
Well, exactly that, Garrett. And I think the beauty of it is we end up with, we do our own bits and we collaborate and hopefully end up being greater than the sum of our parts for it. But, we're a small office in Britain. Someone who I think has been on your podcast before is my great colleague, Joe McDonnell. And
last year at this time, in fact. Yeah.
There you go. So he and I both grew up at Hoylake, and you won't find anyone better at communicating the ideas, in that sort of visual way that he has of constructing all of the things that you actually need to communicate, because you can try and, maybe pull the wool over people's eyes and say, oh no, trust me, it'll be fine. It's hopeless unless you can properly communicate what it is that you want to change or want to do and have people scrutinize it for its merits or otherwise. Then I've always had the opinion you shouldn't change something. If it can't stand up to scrutiny, then don't do it. So getting to work with Joe and really sort of taking that philosophy and approach, and we're lucky we work with some wonderful historic clubs, especially around the coast, and a few sorts of new places as well. So we have a really beautiful mix of the things that we need to really get our teeth stuck into and trying to make the most and restore some of the strategy from courses where it might have been slightly lost over time.
Well, Sam, thank you for coming on the podcast. Really fun talking to you. I thought this was great. And best of luck with your endeavors with Clayton, DeVries Pont. I'll be looking out for that stuff. And also with your quarterly series, Links from the Road. Thanks for coming on, and enjoy Open Week.
Thanks for having me, Garrett. Great fun.
This episode of the Fried Egg Golf Podcast was produced by PJ Clark. Thank you, PJ. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Royal Troon and into all the golf that you can play in South Ayrshire, then I can just about guarantee that you would like what we're doing in Club TFE. This is Fried Egg Golf's membership. Just go to thefriedegg.com/membership to see what it's all about. All right. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back again soon with another episode.